I just got? My copy of David Barton's new book, The Jefferson Lies, Exposing the Myths You've Always Believed About Thomas Jefferson. And I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to put absolutely no preparation whatsoever into this video. I'm going to take Barton's new book, I'm going to take my book, Liars for Jesus, Volume 1, and I'm going to go straight to the chapter in Barton's book on the University of Virginia. And the reason I'm picking this chapter, the book has, was it 7 chapters? 7 chapters. The chapter titles are like lie number 1, lie number 2, lie number 3, because of course Barton is accusing us secularists of being the liars. Now, we're going to skip lie number 1, Thomas Jefferson fathered Sally Hemings' children, because frankly, I don't give a rat's ass who Thomas Jefferson fathered and who he fathered them with, because that has absolutely no bearing on lies that are used to promote legislation or to get things into the public schools, religion into the public schools. So I really don't care about that. We're going to jump right to Thomas Jefferson founded a secular university, which is Barton's lie number 2. Now, I don't really need to use any other sources for this besides my own book. Reason being is that I have a 95-page chapter in my book on Thomas Jefferson and education, fully footnoted. So now I'm going to sit here for the next couple hours. I'm going to do this. I'm just going to leave the camera running. So you'll see me smoking. You'll see me drinking coffee. But have no fear, this video isn't going to be several hours long, because I will cut out any parts where I'm just like flipping, trying to find a page or that sort of stuff. Okay, so Barton's chapter begins. Lie number 2, Thomas Jefferson founded a secular university. Jefferson was involved in many educational endeavors, but his greatest and certainly one dearest to his heart was his founding of the University of Virginia. If one accepts the modern mischaracterization that Jefferson was anti-religious and hostile to Christianity, then it becomes logical to assert that he would promote the secular and oppose the religious in his educational endeavors, especially at his beloved university. Next, Barton quotes several different modern academics. I'm not included. Barton, let me back up here. Barton does not quote me. Barton does not acknowledge my existence. He hasn't since the year 2009. Now, in January 2009, after I had gone to one of his events and gave him a copy of my book, inscribed to, I think it was to the person who more than anyone else inspired this book, and then I got kicked out. Barton has a copy of my book. Now, people might say, well, how do you know he read it? He might have left it there, he might have whatever. No. When he was on his radio show bashing me, he quoted from my book. He was talking about the chapter specifically about the University of Virginia in my book. He knows I've written about this. He knows my book is fully documented. He has read that chapter. So that's important to note, because just recently he said that nobody who tries to refute him ever documents what they're saying. He knows this isn't true, so he's lying about that right from the start. Okay, so after quoting all these professors here, these modern academics that he's about to argue with, Barton says, many others make similar declarations, and several of their recurring claims are worthy of investigation. 1, did Jefferson have a disdain for the influence of Christianity on education? 2, did he found the first intentionally secular university in America? 3, did he hire only deists and Unitarians for its faculty? 4, did he exclude chaplains and religious curriculum from the school? Most Americans would probably answer yes to these 4 questions, for they have been told repeatedly by many of today's writers, both academic and journalistic, that Jefferson was an ardent secularist. But what if this is wrong? What if Jefferson's own education, one that so thoroughly prepared him for the national and international scene, had been largely religious and personally satisfying to him? If such was the case, then it is illogical to assert that Jefferson would seek to exclude from others that which benefited him. So let's begin with a look at Jefferson's own education. This is a very, very common tactic. We see this in other people, not just from Barton. If you look at, Lilback, that professor that was always on Glenn Beck's show with his book, George Washington's Sacred Fire, where he'd have, this is what the Anglican Church believed. George Washington, on paper at least, George Washington was a member of the Anglican Church. Therefore, George Washington believed this, and then he went through all like the different tenets and beliefs and prayers of the Anglican Church as if it was George Washington saying that. So let's look at what Barton says about this. Now, Jefferson was born in 1743. As a youngster, he attended the Anglican St. James Church of Northam Parish with his family. The church was pastored by the Reverend William Douglas. Okay, that was Jefferson's teacher when he was a kid, this minister from Scotland, from 1752 to 1758. Jefferson attended the Reverend Douglas's school. In 1758, his family moved to Albemarle County and attended the Anglican Fredericksville Parish Church, pastored by the Reverend James Fontaine Maury. And actually, that's interesting. James Fontaine Maury is actually the minister who was really interested in geography and actually had a plan to get to the West Coast, which later became Jefferson's Lewis and Clark expeditions. From 1758 to 1760, Jefferson attended Reverend Maury's school. In 1760, after having been trained in religious schools, the 17-year-old Jefferson entered William and Mary, another religious school directly affiliated with the Anglican Church. Yeah, it was when Jefferson attended, but when Jefferson was governor of Virginia in 1779, he unreligiousized William and Mary. He got rid of all the religious stuff. So Jefferson secularized William and Mary, but it was religious when he attended it. Okay. Part of Jefferson's daily routine at the college included morning and evening prayers. So yes, he went to the school had prayers, he agreed with the prayers. We're just going to skip this part, okay? Jefferson entered 5 years of legal training with distinguished attorney and judge George Wythe, who later became a signer of the Declaration of Independence. A central subject of Jefferson's legal studies was English jurist William Blackstone's 4-volume commentaries on the laws of England. Now, this Blackstone stuff is something that is used all the time, because Blackstone's commentaries are really, really religious. There's like a whole section on the offenses against God, because of course Blackstone was in England, which was a Christian nation. So anybody who studied Blackstone or ever used Blackstone for anything, Barton and the other revisionists turned that into, they believed that we also should have religious laws. The quote that Barton used, he doesn't actually use a direct quote here. He says, Jefferson affirmed that American lawyers used Blackstones with the same dedication and reverence that Muslims use the Quran. Okay. This is in my book here because Barton also used this in Original Intent, his other big book. According to David Barton in his book Original Intent, this is a quote from Original Intent here, Blackstone's commentaries on the laws, introduced in 1766, became the law book, and he italicizes and bolds the law book of the Founding Fathers. In fact, so strong was its influence in America that Thomas Jefferson once quipped that American lawyers used Blackstones with the same dedication and reverence that Muslims use the Quran. The quit referred to by Barton is found in an 1810 letter from Jefferson to John Tyler, a Virginia judge, governor of Virginia, and father of the future president. This is the quote from Jefferson that Barton is getting this little lie from. I have long lamented with you the depreciation of law science. The opinion seems to be that Blackstone is to us what the Al-Quran is to Mohammedans, that everything which is necessary is in him, and what is not in him is not necessary. I still lend my counsel and books to such young students as will fix themselves in the neighborhood. Cook's Institutes and Reports are their first, and Blackstone their last book, after an intermediate course of 2 or 3 years. It is nothing more than an elegant digest of what they will have acquired from the real fountains of the law. So Jefferson was not complimenting, recommending, endorsing, or extolling the wonderfulness of Blackstone's. He was putting it down. Okay, he wrote another letter to John Tyler, some guy, about Blackstone a couple of years later in 1812. Here's what Jefferson said to Tyler in that letter. A student finds there a smattering of everything, and his indolence easily persuades him that if he understands that book, he is a master of the whole body of the law. The distinction between these and those who have drawn their stores from the deep and rich minds of Cook on Littleton seems well understood even by the unlettered common people, who apply the appellation of Blackstone lawyers to these ephemeral insects of the law. Jefferson, people who studied Blackstone were ephemeral insects of the law. He also disapproved of Blackstone's for use in America because Blackstone's, how did I put it here, contained British principles that were incompatible with and even dangerous to the Republican principles of American government. It wasn't the founding generation that was heavily influenced by Blackstone, as the religious right authors claim. Most lawyers among the founders had studied law before Blackstone's Commentaries was even published, right? Because it was published in 1766. Jefferson was born in 1743. He went to college when he was 17, before Blackstone's was published. So Barton's thing here about that's what he studied with George Wythe, his instructor at William and Mary, can't possibly be true. It wasn't published yet. Okay, why Jefferson was writing these letters to John Tyler was because in the 1790s, the Federalists, more pro-England, they were attached to England still, like the aristocracy kind of stuff and whatever, which Jefferson considered dangerous to, republicanism. These ideas were glorified by Blackstone. So I'm not going to go into any more of this here, other than, since we're talking about the University of Virginia, when Jefferson was choosing textbooks for the University of Virginia, what Jefferson wrote to, who the hell did he write this to? Let's see. My footnotes. It'll be in the footnotes. Oh, to an unknown recipient. Okay. Jefferson was really glad when in 1818 somebody had written a systematic arrangement of Lord Cook's First Institute of the Laws of England, and this is the book. So now there was Cook, who Jefferson wanted to be taught to law students. Now there was a version of it that was easier to read for students. So Jefferson writes to whoever this unknown recipient was when, in 1825, when they were picking the textbooks and professors for the University of Virginia. He's writing about Francis Gilmer, who I believe was going to be the law professor at the University of Virginia, but ended up not being for son. He died or got sick or something. Anyway, but this is what he writes. He says, I am very glad to find from a conversation with Mr. Gilmer that he considers Cook-Littleton, as methodized by Thomas, as unquestionably the best elementary work, and the one which will be the textbook of his school meaning his law school at the University of Virginia. It is now as agreeable reading as Blackstone, and much more profound. So Jefferson was happy that the guy who he wanted to be the law professor at the university was not going to be using Blackstone. And then he wrote to James Madison in 1826. How do I introduce this here in my book? There is no question that Jefferson did not want Blackstone's commentaries or any law professor who was influenced by it at the University of Virginia, writing the following to James Madison in 1826. In the selection of our law professor, we must be rigorously attentive to his political principles. You will recollect that before the Revolution, Cook-Littleton was the universal elementary book of law students. And again, just what I said, the founders did not learn from Blackstone's, because he's talking before the Revolution. And a sounder Whig never wrote, nor of profounder learning in the orthodox doctrines of the British Constitution, or in what were called English liberties. You remember also that our lawyers were then all Whigs. But when his black letter text and uncouth but cunning learning got out of fashion, and the honeyed Mansfieldism of Blackstone's became the student's horn book, from that moment the profession, the nursery of our Congress, began to slide into Toryism, and nearly all the young brood of lawyers now are of that hue. They suppose themselves indeed to be Whigs, because they no longer know what Whiggism or Republicanism means. It is in our seminary that the Vestal flame is to be kept alive. It is to spread anew over our own and the sister states. If we are true and vigilant in our trust, within a dozen or 20 years, a majority of our own legislature will be from one school, his university. And many disciples will have carried its doctrines home with them to their several states, and will have leavened thus the whole mass. So Jefferson's intent with the law school at the University of Virginia was to not use Blackstone's, which was turning the young lawyers into what he referred to as Tories, but to use the University of Virginia to leaven the whole mass of the United States with his political principles. Now, Barton and them, they complain about, like today, you know, all the stuff about the liberal universities, you know, trying to politically influence the students to, you know, be elitists and this. Jefferson was like the worst than anybody now, because now that's really not true. Back then, Jefferson was writing right here in this letter to Madison, like, hell yeah, we're going to use our university to influence all these people to our political views. Okay, I know I said I wasn't going to read any more of these letters, but this one I have to read. This was one that Jefferson wrote in 1811 to William Cabell Rives on the subject of his own education. Now, who Rives was, he's more associated with Madison. He actually ended up being the first biographer of James Madison. He knew him, family friend, whatever. And he also edited the first edition of Madison's papers. So he was quite a bit younger than Jefferson, so Jefferson's advising him on his own education in 1811. And this is what he says about Blackstone. It says, "Nothing can be sounder than your view of the importance of laying a broad foundation in other branches of knowledge, whereon to raise the superstructure of any particular science which one would choose to profess with credit and usefulness. The lamentable disregard of this, since the Revolution, has filled our country with Blackstone lawyers, Sangrado physicians, meaning bloodletters, okay, a ranting clergy, and a lounging gentry, who render neither honor nor service to mankind." So he said, right in there, Blackstone lawyers, bloodletters and a ranting clergy are not the way he wanted our country to go. He goes into this whole thing of the Enlightenment thinkers that the founders were influenced by, and where the Declaration of Independence came from, all this sort of stuff. All the thinkers, Hugo Grotius, Richard Hooker, William Blackstone, all of these people who were read by the founders, only Hume was a secularist. Okay, Jefferson hated Hume. Jefferson went up there with Blackstone. So now Barton goes into this whole thing of trying to excuse why the founders read this secularist Hume, but he doesn't have to, because he could just say, well, Jefferson didn't like Hume. Oh wait, Barton does actually say that Jefferson found Hume endeavoring to mislead by either the suppression of a truth or the giving it a false coloring. So he actually does say, so this whole freaking section is kind of unnecessary. I guess it'll just look impressive to Barton's readers, all these names of Enlightenment thinkers that he knows about, so Barton will sound all scholarly and crap. Okay, this is really good. Okay, so a little while ago, saying, Barton says that Jefferson, because of his own education when he was young, that when Barton's talking about religion and being taught by religious people, he's saying that Jefferson would want students at the University of Virginia to learn from exactly the same people that he learned from when he was a young student, and uses the religious one, or most religious Blackstone, which Jefferson didn't learn from as a kid. But now, when it's the shoes on the other foot, and he's talking about Hume, who was a secularist, he quotes Jefferson saying that although he read Hume when he was young and a student himself, that he later decided that he disagreed with Hume. So if Jefferson could later, through further research and being more mature and older, whatever, go back and say, okay, this book that I read when I was younger and ate it up, he said, devoured it, okay, I later decided it was necessary to eradicate the poison of it from his mind, then that should apply to all those religious books and religious teachers, whatever they taught him too. But it doesn't, because they were religious and Hume was a secularist. Okay, so then he goes on. Jefferson was similarly forthright in his criticism of other secular Enlightenment writers. So again, whatever secular writers Jefferson read, he could dismiss and disagree with. Whatever religious writers Jefferson read would have stuck with him for the rest of his life. So Barton only mentions like a few writers here that Jefferson criticized, and then says, so if secular Enlightenment writers were not a primary force in shaping Jefferson's thinking, then who was? And then he's got, Jefferson said his three favorite, most important men ever, whatever, were Bacon, Newton, and Locke. Okay, so now, of course, I can already know what's coming here. He's going to go into, John Locke quoted the Bible however many times in his treatises on government, yada, yada, yada. Jefferson studied not only Locke's governmental and legal writings, but also his theological text. His own personal summation of Locke's view of Christianity clearly shows that he definitely did not consider Locke to be a deist. According to Jefferson, Locke's system of Christianity is this: Adam was created happy and immortal. By sin he lost this so that he became subject to total death. Barton's got a hell of a lot of ellipsis in this quote. I think I'm going to have to look this up here. We'll go to Barton's footnotes. What Barton is quoting from here to be able to say that Jefferson did, as he puts it, Jefferson studied not only Locke's governmental and legal writings, but also his theological texts. And when he quotes this whole thing, of course, ending with that the defects in good works shall not be supplied by a faith in Muhammad or Buddha, well, the old name for Buddha, or any other except Christ. Okay, so that sounds all religious. That sounds like Jefferson's agreeing with Locke, and Locke was religious and this and that. What Barton is quoting here is from Jefferson's Notes on Religion from 1776. What Jefferson's Notes on Religion in 1776, he actually, and it says it in the note in this early edition of Jefferson's writings here, which is the one that Barton was using. That's what's in his footnotes. He's got lots of footnotes. The footnote here in this edition of Jefferson's writings that Barton used is these Notes on Religion are endorsed by Jefferson, quote, scraps early in the Revolution. They were probably materials and notes for his speeches in the House of Delegates on the petitions for the disestablishment of the Episcopal Church. Owing to the reminding, it is practically impossible to say if any order was in doubt. Okay, the pages are out of order. Okay. So anyway, going to the page that... well, no, we'll skip the page that Barton quoted, because basically he just chose a chunk and did some editing of it, whatever, for his purposes. But let's get to the part that explains here why Jefferson was using this. This is like Jefferson's conclusion here, and he's saying of Locke, he says, quote, neither pagan nor Mohammedan nor Jew ought to be excluded from the civil rights of the Commonwealth because of his religion. Now he ends quoting Locke here, and this is Jefferson's words. Shall we suffer a pagan to deal with us and not suffer him to pray to his God? Why have Christians been distinguished above all people who have ever lived for persecutions? It is because it is, is it because it is the genius of their religion? No, its genius is the reverse. It is the refusing toleration to those of a different opinion, which has produced all the bustles and wars on account of religion. It was the misfortune of mankind that during the darker centuries, the Christian priests, following their ambition and avarice, combining with the magistrate to divide the spoils of the people, could establish the notion that schismatics might be ousted of their possessions and destroyed. This notion we have not yet cleared ourselves from. This is right when this is before the church was disestablished in Virginia. This is Jefferson developing his arguments. Okay? In this case, no wonder the oppressed should rebel. And they will continue to rebel and raise disturbance until their civil rights are fully restored to them and all partial distinctions, exclusions, and incapacitations removed. So that, my friends, is what Thomas Jefferson was reading. But of course, Barton says this is from a theological text. Alright, when the hell are we going to get to the University of Virginia, which is what this damn chapter is supposed to be about? Okay, now Barton's got here a bunch of the schools. I wish he'd eventually get to the University of Virginia, but a bunch of the, Jefferson was involved in quite a few schools, plans for schools, whatever. And one of them is the Geneva Academy lie. I'm going to first read what's in Barton's book. In 1794, after Jefferson had returned home, back to Virginia, from serving as Secretary of State for President George Washington, he contacted a member of the Virginia legislature about bringing the Geneva Academy from Europe to Virginia. The Geneva Academy was established in 1559 by Reformation theologian John Calvin. In this school, the Bible was an indispensable textbook, and the students from the school became missionaries all over Europe. And Jefferson wanted to bring this famous religious school to his state. Okay. Again, I'm going to read from my book. Barton has read this book. Okay. In my book, I have quoted the D. James Kennedy version of that lie, which was Jefferson, quote, wanted to bring the entire faculty of Calvin's Theological Seminary over from Geneva, Switzerland, and establish them at the University of Virginia. Now, D. James Kennedy, like didn't know enough about this crap to get the lies right, which makes his versions of them just way, way out there, even further than Barton's stories are way out there. So again, I'm going to read, and I'll be saying Kennedy because I was debunking the D. James Kennedy version, but it's the same lie. Okay. There are two things wrong with Kennedy's claim. The first is the time frame. And we won't get into that because that's just referring to it not being about the University of Virginia. Okay, the second, this is what Barton has. Okay. The second is that although the Geneva Academy was originally founded by John Calvin in 1559 as a theological seminary, by the late 1700s it had been transformed into an academy of science. The plan considered by Jefferson was not to import a religious school. It was to import a group of Europe's top science professors. In a letter to George Washington, who was also anxious to establish a public university in America, Jefferson described the Geneva Academy and its faculty. So here's the letter that Jefferson wrote to George Washington. The colleges of Geneva and Edinburgh, and of course Edinburgh was the medical school of the time. It was like the medical school. That's where doctors from America studied and then came back to America. Okay, Geneva and Edinburgh were considered as the two eyes of Europe in matters of science, insomuch that no other pretended any rivalship with either. Edinburgh has been the most famous in medicine during the life of Cullen, but Geneva most so in the other branches of science. Here's the list. So I'm going to read this entire letter here. The list of what each of the professors that constituted that faculty that Jefferson was going to bring over. And again, still from the same letter to George Washington explaining what this faculty was. So we have a guy who wrote the analytic table for the encyclopedists, and which sufficiently proves his comprehensive science. Next guy for his Ad Measurements of a Degree and Other Works, Professor of Natural Philosophy. So you got a mathematician, natural philosophy guy. Okay, that guy's brother, who he just says is also great. He doesn't specify what science that one is. Then again, a guy, natural philosophy and meteorology, and also the translator of the Greek tragedies. That was one guy. Two guys that he groups together, saying both mathematicians and said to be inferior to nobody in that line except Lagrange, who is without an equal. Another one that he just doesn't specify the science, but that he's highly spoken of, and a former professor and his son, who left the college to have more leisure to pursue his geological researches into the Alps, by which work he is very advantageously known. So that was the description of the faculty of the Geneva Academy in 1794 when Thomas Jefferson wanted them to try to bring them over to be the foundation of an American university. So going back, let's repeat here what Barton said about that faculty. Okay? He said, in this school, the Bible was an indispensable textbook, and students from the school became missionaries all over Europe, and Jefferson wanted to bring this famous religious school to his state. Yeah, did that sound like a religious school there? What Jefferson wrote to Washington? This is another good one. Okay. This is one that about a school that Jefferson had nothing to do with, but it's a really popular lie, which is also covered in volume 1 of my book. Okay. In 1804, President Jefferson negotiated the purchase of the Louisiana Territory. With authority over that region transferring from the French to the Americans, those living there were uncertain as to what changes might result. Sister Thérèse Farjeon, Mother Superior of a Catholic school and convent in New Orleans, therefore wrote President Jefferson asking what the status of their religious school would now be under American government. Jefferson responded, "Your institution, ellipsis, by training up its young members in the way they should go," brackets, Proverbs 22:6, "cannot fail to ensure the patronage of the government it is under. Be assured that it will meet with all the protection my office can give it." Okay. So Barton doesn't have a long version of that lie in there, but this is a school that Thomas Jefferson had absolutely nothing to do with. The reason this convent, the Ursuline nuns down in New Orleans, contacted him really didn't have to do as much with their school as their property. People in Louisiana Territory were nervous about the deeds to their property. You know, these nuns, they were like really, really sharp businesswomen on top of being nuns, and they wanted it in writing from Congress that their property would be protected. But you know, I'm not going to go into this whole story here because I'm still waiting for the turn to get to the damn University of Virginia, which is what this chapter is supposed to be about, and we're kind of close to the end. Okay, pretty close to the end of the chapter. Okay, another one. 1805, Jefferson was elected head of the Board of Trustees for the brand new Washington, D.C. public schools. He told the city council that he'd be willing to undertake the duties proposed, yada, 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 yada. This is the one about, there was a school, a public school in Washington, D.C. that used the Bible and Watts hymns as their reading texts. And there was a report in, I believe, 1813 from the guy who ran one of these schools saying that this was how the students were progressing in their reading, okay? But that was in like 1813, right? Jefferson wasn't president anymore. He wasn't on the school board. He wasn't even involved in this when he was the President of the United States and on the school board. He was the President of the United States. This is kind of an honorary title, President of the school board. But they've constructed this like whole lie about it, and of course Barton quotes the report from 1813. Was it 1813? Maybe I should check Barton's footnote. Maybe I should check my book, because see, Barton's footnote does have the book that this comes from, but it doesn't indicate, because the book was written later, so it doesn't, in like 1876, the history of public schools in Washington, D.C., so nowhere does Barton say that the date of what he's quoting, leading his readers to assume that this happened in 1805 when Jefferson was elected the head of the school board. So let me look in my book, because I know I quote this and I do give the date of this. Okay, I was right. Yeah, 1813. So what Barton is quoting here is, this is from a report of the teacher of one of the schools in Washington, D.C. Okay, so the report of the schools was that 55 have learned to read in the Old and New Testaments and are able to spell words of 3, 4, and 5 syllables. 26 are now learning to read Dr. Watts' hymns and spell words of 2 syllables. 10 are learning words of 4 and 5 letters, of 59 out of the whole number, blah, 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 blah. So what it's saying is they were using religious books, the Bible and another religious book, as their reading texts. Okay. Okay. But, like I said, we're talking 1813. Actually, the school didn't even open until after Jefferson was already, like, not president anymore, I think. Hang on a second. Okay. Was the Lancastrian school that opened in Washington, D.C. in 1812, 3 years after Jefferson left the presidency and returned to Virginia. So Thomas Jefferson had nada to do with this school. Oh, wait, he's getting to the University of Virginia here. The hell with the rest of this stuff. Okay. Well, this is good. Right before getting into the University of Virginia, Barton's got this kind of paragraph, a little conclusion of all these other schools that he mentioned leading up to the University of Virginia. And he says, in short, Jefferson was involved with many educational endeavors prior to establishing the University of Virginia in 1819. And in none of them was there any attempt to exclude religious instruction. To the contrary, in each case he took intentional steps to include or preserve it. So, the examples that Barton gave, though, Geneva Academy was really a science college faculty. What was the other one? The Washington, D.C. public schools, where it's a report from a school that wasn't even opened until 3 years after Jefferson no longer even had anything to do with the Washington public schools. We are now getting to the University of Virginia, finally. And Barton begins, 3 distinctive features characterized universities founded in America prior to Jefferson's University of Virginia. Those universities, 1, were founded and controlled by one particular denomination, 2, housed theological seminaries for training ministers for that specific denomination, and 3, had prominent ministers from that denomination serving as president of the university. He talks about Harvard and William and Mary, and of course, as I said, when Jefferson was governor of Virginia, he made William and Mary not a religious school anymore. Okay, here we go. Departing from this pattern, Jefferson and his Board of Visitors specifically founded the University of Virginia to be America's first trans-denominational school. A school not affiliated with one specific denomination, but rather one that would train students from all denominations. This is the core of the lie about the University of Virginia, was that Jefferson wasn't founding a secular university, he was founding a university where there would be seminaries and religious instruction and this and that. It just wouldn't be a specific denomination. That is not true. There was no religion at the University of Virginia while Jefferson was there. Only a couple of things when Madison took over after Jefferson's death. Couple of things that started when Madison was there, but interestingly, what Madison allowed, such as a student-led religious group, are exactly what is now allowed in public schools because of various Supreme Court decisions. So Madison, in like the early 1830s, when these things happened, the religious student clubs, and on the same basis as the debating society and other clubs at the university, is exactly what's allowed in today's public schools. So Madison had it right in the 1830s. It's what eventually was decided, 40 years ago, whenever, by the Supreme Court for the current schools. But many today wrongly misinterpret Jefferson's denominational non-preferentialism to be secularism. And they also erroneously point to what Jefferson did with his own alma mater's professor of divinity as another alleged proof of his commitment to religion-free education, the getting rid of the... Let's see what Barton has to say about this. Actually, this is the first time he's addressed this with the William and Mary. Okay, in 1779, when Jefferson became governor of Virginia, he was placed on the board of William and Mary. At that time, he introduced legislation to recast the school, an accomplishment known as the Jefferson reorganization. He did Jefferson indeed proposed to abolish the School of Theology with its professorships of religion. Apparently so, for Jefferson himself acknowledged, "I effected during my residence in Williamsburg last year a change in the organization of that institution by abolishing the 2 professorships of divinity." So it appears that Professor Levy was right. Is Barton being honest here? Hang on, wait. So it appears that Professor Levy was right that Jefferson did seek to secularize higher education. At least it appears that way until one reads the rest of Jefferson's explanation, and then it becomes evident that his intention was exactly the opposite. Jefferson explained, "The College of William and Mary was an establishment purely of the Church of England. The visitors were required to be all of that church, the professors to subscribe its 39 articles, and its students to learn its catechism. And one of its fundamental objects was declared to be to raise up ministers for that church. The religious jealousies, therefore, of all the dissenters took alarm lest this might give an ascendancy to the Anglican sect. Jefferson abolished the School of Divinity because it was solely an arm of the state-established Anglican Church, and he wanted it to be up. So here we go. Okay, Jefferson abolished the secularized William and Mary, again, because the claim that people like Barton make that he wanted to be a non-denominational, still Christian, but non-denominational school. Okay. Further evidence that his reorganization of the college was not secular was his stipulation that, quote, "the said professor shall likewise appoint from time to time a missionary of approved veracity to the several tribes of Indians." Okay, he's talking about the Braffington Institute. I gotta find this in my book. Okay, I was close. It was the Brafferton. Brafferton Fellowship, or Brafferton Professorship at William and Mary is what Barton is referring to there as proof that Jefferson didn't secularize William and Mary. In my book, I have used the version of this. All these revisionist books contain some versions of basically the same lies. In my book, I quoted the one from Gary DeMar's America's Christian History, The Untold Story. And he had said, "Jefferson advocated the tax-supported College of William and Mary maintain a perpetual mission among the Indian tribes, which included the instruction of the principles of Christianity." Okay, so that's what Barton's talking about here. Okay, this is what I wrote. Jefferson did not advocate a mission to instruct the Indians in the principles of Christianity. He was stuck with it because it was written into the charter of the college. What Jefferson proposed was to turn this into an anthropological rather than a religious mission. The mission, called the Brafferton Professorship, was established with a private donation from the will of English scientist Robert Boyle. The funding was provided by the rental of Brafferton, an estate in England purchased by the executors of Boyle's will. The 1693 Charter of William and Mary had specified that the college was to train young Indian boys in the Anglican religion to become missionaries to their people, and in 1697 the income from the Brafferton estate was earmarked for this purpose. The Indian school at the college was a failure from the start. The biggest problem was that the Indians didn't want to send their children to a white school. In fact, the school's first 6 students were actually boys who were purchased from enemy tribes that had captured them. Although the college's charter called for 20 Indian students at a time, in 1721 there were none at all. Nevertheless, the Brafferton building was built in 1723 as a permanent home for the school, which struggled along for the next 50 years. The last Indian student was admitted in 1775. There is no evidence that any student who attended the school ever became a Christian missionary. I think I quote some stuff from Benjamin Franklin that's actually pretty funny, but too long to read. Okay. In 1779, Thomas Jefferson became both governor of Virginia and a member of William and Mary's Board of Visitors. He immediately set to work on reorganizing the college with the goal of turning it into a non-sectarian state university. The main problem Jefferson faced was that the Board of Visitors did not have the authority to make changes that required amending the college's constitution, something that could only be done by the legislature. Jefferson did propose the changes he wanted to make in his bill for amending the Constitution of the College of William and Mary and substituting more certain revenues for its support, but this bill was never acted on. Among the changes that the Board of Visitors could not make was to increase the number of professors. They could, however, change what each professor taught. So Thomas Jefferson had a loophole. William and Mary's Constitution limited the number of professorships to 5 plus the Brafferton. At the time that Jefferson joined the board, the college had a divinity school with 2 professors teaching theology and what Jefferson called Oriental languages, meaning Hebrew and Aramaic. There was also a professor of Latin and Greek. Jefferson got rid of all 3 of these and replaced them with professorships of law and police, anatomy, and medicine. Okay, so yeah, Jefferson didn't secularize the university. He just replaced all the theological professors with professors of law, anatomy, and medicine, and modern languages. While the purpose of the Brafferton professorship could not be changed completely, Jefferson's idea was to take advantage of it to study the Indians' culture and languages. Jefferson was really interested in studying Indian languages and the origins of languages in general, so this wasn't surprising at all. Okay, the phrases that DeMar takes out of context, okay, same stuff that Barton's using, basically. To create his lie come from Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia. DeMar omits the part of the sentence in which Jefferson explained his plan for the Brafferton professorship, and also the part where he made a point of noting that instruction in Christianity as part of this position could not be eliminated because it was required by its founder. So yeah, Jefferson is stuck with this because it's in the charter. He can't change the charter. He's stuck with it. He has to work around it. And this is how he worked around it, okay? This is what Jefferson wrote. The purposes of the Brafferton institution will be better answered by maintaining a perpetual mission among the Indian tribes, the object of which, besides instructing them in the principles of Christianity as the founder requires, should be to collect their traditions, laws, customs, languages, and other circumstances which might lead to a discovery of their relation with one another or descent from other nations. When these objects are accomplished with one tribe, the missionary might pass on to another. So, no, the missionary wasn't going to move on once he had converted the Indians. The missionary was going to move on once they had gathered enough anthropological language and other information about the Indian tribe. Okay, that's the end of the Jefferson quote, and we're back to what I wrote. In addition to providing an opportunity to learn about the Indians, Jefferson's idea of sending the Brafferton professor among them would remove the Indian school from the grounds of William and Mary, getting rid of the only remaining religious school at the college, which that's what it did. The school which hadn't had a student, the last student was admitted in 1775, so the Brafferton building at William and Mary would no longer be being used as a religious school. Now we're going to get to the precise thing that Barton quoted here. First, let me my introduction of it in my book. In his bill for amending the Constitution of the College of William and Mary, Jefferson proposed that the number of professorships be increased to 8 plus the Brafferton. He also specified the duties of the Brafferton professorship and made it very clear that it was for these specified duties and not whatever religious instruction this professor might engage in that college funds would be used. In the bill, he called the position, quote, this is what Jefferson called the position, missionary for Indian history, etc. And here's what Jefferson wrote. The said professors shall likewise appoint from time to time a missionary of approved veracity to the several tribes of Indians, whose business shall be to investigate their laws, customs, religions, traditions, and more particularly their languages, constructing grammars thereof, as well as may be, and copious vocabularies, and on oath to communicate from time to time to the said president and professors the materials he collects, to be by them laid up and preserved in their library, for which trouble the said missionary shall be allowed a salary at the discretion of the visitors out of the revenue of the college. That was Jefferson's description of what the Brafferton professorship was going to be. He couldn't totally say that the professor wouldn't teach religion, but nowhere does he say that they actually would or had to. And like I say, he renamed the position a missionary for Indian history, etc. So he's still calling it a missionary, but obviously the duties of this missionary were not going to be religious. So I think Barton's proof that that's Jefferson not secularizing William and Mary is kind of out the window there. And then Barton's conclusion from that, of course, because he omits those, a missionary of history or whatever, Barton goes on, Jefferson took steps to ensure that the gospel was promoted at William and Mary, but not just according to the 39 Anglican articles and that church's denominational catechism. I already read this part, I guess. Yeah, so that's it. That's the point where I think Barton really is actually going to get to the University of Virginia. Okay, in the same manner, the manner that Barton now says he has proved, in the same manner, Jefferson sought to ensure that the University of Virginia would also reflect denominational non-preferentialism. He therefore invited the seminaries of many denominations to establish themselves on the campus, explaining, we suggest the expediency of encouraging the different religious sects to establish each for itself a professorship of their own tenets on the confines of the university, so near as that their students may attend the lectures there and have the free use of our library, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that is the standard lie for every religious, history revisionist writing about the University of Virginia. This is what they rely on. Okay, this supposed plan to establish seminaries on the University of Virginia. I need to refer to my book here. Hey, here it is. This whole seminaries at the University of Virginia thing is based on something in the Board of Visitors 1822 report, where they extended this invitation to the religious sects to basically shut up the clergy members and members of the legislature who were attacking Jefferson because the university was totally secular. The problem here was that this was holding up Jefferson getting the funding to finish building, like the rotunda and stuff. So the Board of Visitors in 1822 extended an invitation for all of the sects to establish their own seminaries near the university. So I'm just going to read, in my book, of course, I'm quoting David Barton's older book, Original Intent, but it's basically the same. The Board of Visitors' 1822 invitation to the religious sects to establish their own schools near the University of Virginia is the source of a number of lies, all of which contain some combination or variation of the following three claims. That the invitation was extended by Jefferson to promote religious instruction at the university, that religious schools were invited to build on state property, that these schools were actually built and attended by university students. According to David Barton in his book Original Intent, Jefferson, quote, expected students to participate in the various religious schools which he personally had invited to locate adjacent to and upon the university property. David Barton, like most liars for Jesus, completely ignores all of the letters in which Jefferson and Madison, as well as Joseph Cabell, another member of the Board of Visitors, made it perfectly clear that the reason for the invitation was to stop the clergy's attacks on the university. Cabell, as mentioned earlier, was a member of the university's Board of Visitors as well as a member of the Virginia legislature. Jefferson did see some good that could come from the sects accepting the invitation, but it wasn't that university students would attend their religious schools. It was that future ministers might attend classes at the university and study science, which he saw as the best remedy for religious fanaticism. The following is from one of the many letters in which Jefferson gave the real reason for the invitation. This particular letter was written to Thomas Cooper in 1823, shortly after Jefferson learned from Joseph Cabell that the invitation had, in fact, been effective in stopping the use of the clergy's rumors by the university's enemies in the legislature. We disarmed them of this calumny, however, in our last report by inviting the different sects to establish their respective divinity schools on the margin of the grounds of the university, so that their students might attend its schools and have the benefit of its library, to be entirely independent of it at the same time, and no ways incorporated with it. One sect, I think, may do it, but another, disdaining equality, ambitioning nothing less than a soaring ascendancy, will despise our invitation. They are hostile to all education of which they have not the direction, and foresee that this institution, by enlightening the minds of the people and encouraging them to appeal to their own common sense, is to dispel the fanaticism on which their power is built. That's what Jefferson wrote about the invitation. The sect that Jefferson knew would despise the invitation was the Presbyterians. The sect he thought might accept it was the Episcopalians. For reasons explained later in this chapter, Jefferson wasn't concerned about Virginia's other two significant sects, the Baptists or the Methodists, because they just had no interest in opening schools at the time. And I'm not going to read this whole thing. The deal with the Episcopalians, at first Jefferson thought they might accept the invitation, but it turned out they were trying to reestablish the Episcopalian seminary at William and Mary that Jefferson had abolished in 1779, so they were busy with that. So, in short, none of the sects took the university up on their offer, so there never were any seminaries, religious seminaries, at or near the university. The Board of Visitors needed to stop the clergy's rumors for two reasons. The first was that they were interfering with the board's selection of professors. The second was that the university's enemies in the legislature were effectively using these rumors in conjunction with their accusations that Jefferson was being extravagant and wasting public money to block the funding needed to finish the university's buildings. In January 1820, John Holt Rice, a Presbyterian minister and editor of the Virginia Literary and Evangelical magazine, published an article that, among other things, accused the university of promoting Unitarianism while excluding Trinitarian Christianity. Rice's accusation was based on the appointment of Thomas Cooper as the university's first professor. Dr. Cooper was a Unitarian and had a reputation for being outspoken about his religious opinions. Dr. Rice, assuming that clergymen were to be excluded from professorships at the university, claimed that the appointment of Dr. Cooper, although not a clergyman, was an unfair promotion of Unitarianism. Okay, now, somebody sent Thomas Cooper a copy of John Holt Rice's attack on the university in which he was using Cooper to rile people up. Jefferson had only himself heard about Rice's article a few days before receiving a letter from Cooper saying he'd resign. Now, at this point in 1820, Jefferson underestimated how much damage John Holt Rice's attacks were going to do. So when Cooper offered to resign, Jefferson really wanted this guy to be a professor. When Cooper offered to resign, this is what Jefferson wrote back his initial assessment of the Rice situation. The Baptists are sound Republicans and zealous supporters of their government. The Methodists are Republican mostly, satisfied with their government meddling with nothing but the concerns of their own calling and opposing nothing. These two sects are entirely friendly to our university. The Anglicans are the same. The Presbyterian clergy alone, not their followers, remain bitterly federal and malcontent with their government. They are violent, ambitious of power, and intolerant in politics as in religion, and want nothing but license from the laws to kindle again the fires of their leader John Knox, and to give us a second blast from his trumpet. Having a little more monkish learning than the clergy of the other sects, they are jealous of the general diffusion of science, and therefore hostile to our seminary, lest it should qualify their antagonists of the other sects to meet them in equal combat. Not daring to attack the institution with the avowal of their real motives, they peck at you, at me, and at every feather they can spy out. But in this they have no weight, even with their own followers, excepting a few old men among them who may still be federal and Anglo men. Their main body are good citizens, friends to their government, anxious for reputation, and therefore friendly to the university. So in 1820, Thomas Jefferson didn't think Rice was going to cause a big problem. Jefferson also assumed, based on previous experience, that the other sects would band together against the Presbyterians regardless of the issue, if it appeared that that sect was in any way trying to get control of the university. He soon realized he was wrong about this, writing the following to William Short only a month after his letter to Cooper. The serious enemies are the priests of the different religious sects, to whose spells on the human mind its improvement is ominous. Their pulpits are now resounding with denunciations against the appointment of Dr. Cooper, whom they charge as a monotheist in opposition to their tritheism. Hostile as these sects are in every other point to one another, they unite in maintaining their mystical theogony against those who believe there is one God only. So basically, this is what started the attacks that led to Jefferson and the Board of Visitors extending that invitation to the religious sects to open their seminaries. Now, Barton does bring up Thomas Cooper in his chapter in a section with the heading, "Was Jefferson's faculty composed of Unitarians?" Question mark. You know, because he's going to debunk that Jefferson's faculty was composed of Unitarians. The thing is that that's a straw man argument, because nobody has claimed that Jefferson only hired Unitarians since John Rice in 1820. So Barton debunks that non-existent claim by saying that there were faculty members who were Episcopalians and a Lutheran and whatever, and then gets to Cooper and says that Jefferson once invited Thomas Cooper to be professor of chemistry and law, but when it became known that Cooper was a Unitarian, a public outcry arose against him, and Jefferson and the university withdrew its offer to him. That is just completely untrue. The university did not withdraw its offer to Cooper. Cooper resigned in 1821 because while waiting for the university, and this wasn't just about the issue with him being a Unitarian, it was the university was not on track schedule-wise with the buildings or anything. So Cooper was teaching at South Carolina College while waiting to go to the University of Virginia. Eventually, he just decided to take a permanent position at South Carolina College and informed Jefferson of this in 1821. So now, the other thing about this particular lie is it's a really great example of how Barton's footnotes don't support what he says. Now, people who believe David Barton will always say, oh, but he's got all these footnotes, everything is so well documented, to which I reply, but look up his footnotes. You'll find that an awful lot of them say something completely different than what he is claiming they say, and this is a great example, because what Barton's footnote leads to is page 389 of volume 19 of the writings of Thomas Jefferson. Okay, and what that is, when you look it up, is a board meeting of the university from 1820. This is a year before Thomas Cooper resigned. What it says is, resolved that the Committee of Superintendents be authorized to communicate to Dr. Thomas Cooper the delay and uncertainty now unavoidable in regard to the time and opening of the university, and to make such change in the contracts with him as to them may seem advisable. So they were just making, they had been paying him something while he was waiting, so they were going to extend that, or whatever changes they need to make to his contract, because they still were planning on having him as a professor. Barton uses that to say that the university withdrew its offer to him. Now, part of John Holt Rice's attacks on Jefferson included accusing him of that he was going to exclude clergymen from being professors. Now, the university's Board of Visitors never officially said this. So in a way, Rice's accusation was unfounded, but it actually was true that Jefferson intended to exclude clergymen. And the proof of that is that in 1824, when Jefferson sent Francis Gilmer, that guy that he wanted to have as the law professor, sent him to Europe to recruit professors, this exists, notes from that meeting that Jefferson wrote, and they included his criteria that he was giving Gilmer as the instructions for his recruiting professors for the university, and it says, this is Jefferson's words, no clergymen. So Jefferson was excluding clergymen. Okay, so now we're going to get to what directly led to that invitation for the sects to open their own seminaries. Joseph Cabell had actually met with John Holt Rice to try to get him to stop the attacks on Jefferson and the university. And from that meeting, he got a lot of information and was able to pass this on to Jefferson, so Jefferson knew where everything really stood. He found out that, among other things, there was someone spying on Jefferson at his other home in Bedford, Virginia. Jefferson had a second home, and knew of things that Jefferson had said, and those were passed on to the clergy who were attacking him. Cabell also found out that two other professors that Jefferson was trying to bring to the university, that the clergy had done like background checks on them and their religious beliefs, and that no matter who Jefferson wanted to bring in as a professor, the Presbyterians were going to investigate, and there was going to be a religious test. And I'm going to read this part from my book about the letter that Cabell wrote to Jefferson. Cabell's letter, which made it clear that Cooper's resignation had not made the clergy back off, was almost certainly what prompted Jefferson to cook up the idea of inviting the religious sects to open their own schools near the university. There is no doubt that this invitation was entirely Jefferson's idea, although he claimed in the October 1822 report to the legislature that it was, quote, suggested by some pious individuals. Joseph Cabell even referred to it in a letter to Jefferson as, quote, your suggestion. Claiming that the idea was suggested by someone else would prevent the clergy from being able to claim that the invitation was another plan designed by Jefferson to keep religion separated from the university, even though this is exactly what it was. To battle the other problematic rumor that Jefferson was being extravagant and wasting public money, Cabell suggested that the board have a set of books prepared for the legislature accounting for every penny that had been spent. The combination of the invitation to the religious sects and the account books worked. In February 1823, the university loan bill was passed by the legislature, and as I said, a lot of this it was holding up the funding. So this meant that the construction of the rotunda could finally proceed. Cabell wrote the following to Jefferson on February 3rd, 1823, when it looked certain that this important bill was going to be passed. I was from the first confident that no weapon could be wielded by us with more efficacy than this annual rendition of accounts, which seemed to be a rod in pickle for us. I think also that your suggestion respecting the religious sects has had great influence. It is the Franklin that has drawn the lightning from the cloud of opposition. There you go. The invitation to the sects was described by Joseph Cabell, original member of the Board of Visitors of the university, as the Franklin that has drawn the lightning from the cloud of opposition. Jefferson's plan worked. Now, Jefferson, as I mentioned, didn't really think any of the religious sects, except possibly the Episcopalians, were ever going to actually accept this invitation. It was just the extending of the invitation that would get the clergy to stop the attacks. And he was right. None of the religious sects did take him up on the invitation. There never were any seminaries at the University of Virginia. The first time anyone ever even thought about accepting the invitation wasn't until like the late 1850s. I think the Presbyterians considered it, but then dropped the idea. So no, there never were any religious seminaries at the University of Virginia. Okay, but this is how Barton paints John Rice, the attacker of Jefferson and the university. He says, the non-denominational approach caused Presbyterians, Baptists, Methodists, and others to give the university the friendship and cooperative support necessary to make it a success. Consider Presbyterian minister John Holt Rice as an example. Holt was, oh, there's a typo in Barton's book, that should be Rice. Holt was a nationally known evangelical leader with extensive credentials. He founded the Virginia Bible Society, started the Virginia Evangelical and Literary Magazine to report on revivals across the country, was elected national leader of the Presbyterian Church, and offered the presidency of Princeton, but instead accepted the chair of theology at Hampton-Sydney College. Yeah, because he didn't support the university and decided to try to pull some of the state funding from the university to start his seminary at Hampton-Sydney, rather than accept the invitation from the university that the different sects could have their seminaries at the university. Okay, Rice fully supported and promoted the University of Virginia. Did it sound like Rice was supporting the University of Virginia? Okay, so Barton's version of what this invitation to the sects to open their seminaries resulted in is this. In fact, Jefferson actually increased the number of professorships of divinity by encouraging each denomination to have a professorship of their own tenets at the school. So we had Jefferson extend an invitation just to shut up the clergy and the members of the legislature who opposed them, that nobody ever took him up on, and that Jefferson knew none of the sects would take him up on, except for that brief time when he thought the Episcopalians might. To Barton, that's Jefferson increasing the number of professorships of divinity. Okay, what else does he have here? In what was called the Rockfish Report. I think that's not what this is from. I'm not even going to bother looking because it doesn't really matter whether it was from the Rockfish Report. The Rockfish Report was like the original proposal for the university in, I think, 1818. That Jefferson, in getting rid of the professorship of divinity, not having a professor of divinity or any religious instruction, but knowing that, you know, people might freak over this, which, you know, obviously they did a couple of years later. Jefferson put in the description of what the professor of ethics would cover, the proofs of the being of a God, the creator, preserver, and supreme ruler of the universe, the author of all relations of morality, and of the laws and obligations these infer, will be within the province of the professor of ethics. Okay, so that, obviously, Barton's going to use that, but who did Jefferson get as the professor of ethics? You gotta hang on while I find this. Oh, and Jefferson also implied that the teaching of ancient languages would have a religious purpose, although the only reason given by Jefferson anywhere else for teaching Latin and Greek was to read the classics in their original languages. And, oh, yeah, he also included Hebrew, although this was never going to be taught at the university at all. But getting back to that professor of ethics. Okay, this is what Jefferson wrote to James Madison about selecting the professor of ethics. I am quite at a loss for a professor of ethics. This subject has been so exclusively confined to the clergy that when forced to seek one not of that body, it becomes difficult. But it is a branch of science of little difficulty to any ingenious man. Locke, Stewart, Brown, Tracy, for the general science of the mind furnish material abundant, and that of ethics is still more trite. I should think that any person with a general education rendering them otherwise worthy of a place among his scientific brethren might soon qualify himself. So in other words, Jefferson had this very religious description of what the professor of ethics was going to be, but in reality it was just basically, hey, we got to find somebody who can teach some ethics classes. Hey, we got to find somebody who can teach some ethics classes. And Madison replied to Jefferson suggesting George Tucker. This is a really interesting guy. This is like the America's first science fiction author. This guy was actually pretty cool. But his main field, scholarly field, was political economy, and he had also been a member of Congress. In fact, he was a member of Congress when Jefferson and Madison approached him about becoming a professor. So Madison replies to Jefferson, "What are the collateral aptitudes of George Tucker, the member of Congress? I have never seen him and can only judge him by a volume of miscellaneous essays published not very long ago. They are written with acuteness and elegance and indicate a capacity and taste for philosophical literature." And now the two candidates that Jefferson was already considering before Madison proposed Tucker were also lawyers. Okay, so it was going to be a lawyer teaching the proofs of the being of God, the creator, preserver, and supreme ruler of the universe, and author of all relations of morality and of the laws and obligations these infer. Get this now. This was bull that Jefferson was putting in these reports to the legislature. He had no intentions of teaching religion at the university, and no religion was ever taught at the university when Jefferson was there. Everything that Barton needs to rely on here is from reports of things that they were maybe gonna do, but these things never actually happened. In the end, they did hire George Tucker, who was the professor of ethics. And they called it the professor of moral philosophy and political economy. That was the religion teacher. And, Tucker was there for like 20 years. When Tucker retired in 1845, the university lost the last of its original professors. It was Tucker's successor, William Holmes McGuffey, like McGuffey readers, who replaced him. And it was McGuffey who was really religious. The McGuffey readers, Barton loves to refer to those because of, you know, religious crap in public schools. It was McGuffey who would play the big role in undermining all the secular policies of Jefferson and Madison. McGuffey was actually a Presbyterian minister, and he was the first minister to be a professor at the university. So it wasn't until like 20 years after Jefferson died that there was a clergyman professor at the university. Oh, okay. More proof that the people who knew Jefferson, who were there when he was founding the university, knew he was founding a secular university. So a couple years after Jefferson died, one of the original professors was going to be leaving. And Chapman Johnson decided that he was going to use that opportunity to try to reverse Jefferson's policy of not having any clergymen as professors. But bearing in mind now that James Madison is still there, so he's got to get it past Madison. So again, I'm just going to read here. But even with Jefferson gone, Johnson knew he would have to get either Joseph Cabell or James Madison to go along. So he wrote to John Hartwell Cockey, who's another board member that Johnson knew would probably side with him, okay, and asked him to work on Cabell. And this is what he writes. This is Chapman Johnson, original Board of Visitors member. Tell Cabell it is time to give up his old prejudice upon this subject, the offspring of the French Revolution, long since a bastard by divorce of the unnatural alliance between liberty and atheism. Okay? So, Chapman Johnson, original board member, knew Jefferson was there from the founding. Saw the university as not only secular, but the unnatural alliance between liberty and atheism. Johnson also wrote to Madison, apparently trying to trick him into stating his position on hiring clergymen by claiming that he had reason to suspect that a particular candidate for the professorship might be a clergyman. Madison didn't buy this and didn't give Johnson a definite answer. He then listed all the problems that allowing clergymen into the professorships could cause. Madison knew that Johnson was scheming to bring religion into the university by putting clergymen on the faculty, so he ended his letter by making it clear that he wanted religious worship and instruction to be initiated by the students, not the school. And this is where we get to, this is what's allowed in public schools today. Okay, so in 1827, James Madison, his policy was what's allowed today. This is what Madison wrote. I have indulged more particularly the hope that the provision for religious instruction and observances among the students would be made by themselves and their parents or guardians, each contributing to a fund to be applied in remunerating the services of clergymen of denominations corresponding with the preference of contributors. Small contributions would suffice, and the arrangements would become more adequate and more efficient as the students become more numerous. Whilst being altogether voluntary, it would interfere neither with the characteristic peculiarity of the university, the consecrated principle of the law, nor the spirit of the country. So right there, that is proof that at that point, there were no clergymen, there were no chaplains, there was nothing, because Madison is saying right there how he hopes this will happen when it happens. It hasn't happened yet. Okay, he's got a section, did Jefferson bar religious instruction from the academic program. Okay, and again, he's basing this on what Jefferson said in the 1818 Rockfish Report, that they were going to teach. Oh, he changed this to okay. With the languages. For example, he directed the professor of ancient languages to teach biblical Greek. Now, the word biblical isn't to teach Greek, and as I already said, Jefferson wanted Greek and Latin taught to be able to read the classics in those languages. So it's Barton inserting biblical before Greek. Hebrew, which never was taught. Okay, so this next one's interesting because Barton uses it in his new book in relation to the University of Virginia, but in his old book, Original Intent, he used it in relation to Jefferson's plan for education in Virginia from the 1770s, but really actually had to do with neither. In his new book, this is what he writes. In addition to religious instruction given by the professor of ethics and the professor of ancient languages, Jefferson personally ensured that religious study would also be an inseparable part of the study of law and political science. As he explained to a prominent judge, in my catalog, considering ethics as well as religion as supplements to law in the government of man, I had placed them in that sequence. In Original Intent, he says, Barton writes, when Thomas Jefferson authored his plan of education in Virginia, he considered religious study an inseparable component in the study of law and political science. As he explained, in my catalog, considering ethics as well as religion as supplements to law in the government of man, I had placed them in the sequence, the same quote. Okay. What this actually was, Jefferson wrote to Judge Augustus Woodward, okay, and Woodward and Jefferson shared an interest in books and libraries and the cataloging of libraries. This had nothing to do with any plan for any school. This was about Jefferson's own personal library and how it was cataloged. Woodward had developed a system of classification for all the branches of science, which he published in 1816 as a system of universal science. Okay, it's basically a library cataloging system. Now, in the letter quoted by Barton, Jefferson, who had come up with a different system for cataloging his own library, was just explaining to Woodward how he had arrived at what he thought was the proper place for books on religion in his personal library. This is what he wrote. The naturalists, you know, distribute the history of nature into 3 kingdoms or departments: zoology, botany, mineralogy. Ideology or mind, however, occupies so much space in the field of science that we might perhaps erect it into a 4th kingdom or department. But inasmuch as it makes a part of the animal construction only, it would be more proper to subdivide zoology into physical and moral. The latter, including ideology, ethics, and mental science generally, in my catalog, considering ethics as well as religion as supplements to law in the government of man, I had placed them in that sequence. But certainly the faculty of thought belongs to animal history, is an important portion of it, and should therefore find its place. It's Jefferson's talking about the best way to set up a library catalog, and of course any library, including his own, had books on religion. Nothing to do with the University of Virginia. So next, Barton writes, Jefferson also approved of worship on campus, acknowledging, quote, that a building, ellipsis, in the middle of the grounds may be called for in time, in which may be rooms for religious worship. Okay, yeah, this is another thing from one of the early proposals to the legislature, you know, to minimize in their minds that there was going to be no religion allowed on the campus, okay? He later ordered that in the university rotunda, quote, one of its large elliptical rooms on its middle floor shall be used for ellipsis, and I know these whole quotes, I can't remember exactly what Barton's, he's omitting something for some reason here, but it shall be used for religious worship. He further declared that, quote, the students of the university will be free and expected to attend religious, and Barton puts his emphasis, expected to attend religious worship at the establishment of their respective sects. The establishments of their respective sects are those seminaries that never existed. So when Jefferson writes, and again, I think this was over some other later dispute about people attacking the university for being irreligious, so they put something in about the attending religious worship at the establishment of their respective sects. Again, Jefferson, knowing there were never going to be any establishments for these respective sects. So Barton's concluding paragraph of this section, similar to the one of the last section, is, Jefferson took many deliberate steps to ensure that religious instruction was an integral part of academic studies. Clearly, then, the claim that there was no Christian curriculum or instruction at the University of Virginia is demonstrably false and easily disproved by Jefferson's own writings. Well, you just heard Jefferson's own writings. In here, you get a couple of snippets from things, and then Barton's conclusion. Next section, did the University of Virginia have chaplains? The modern claim that the University of Virginia had no chaplains is also easily disproved by original documents, including early newspaper ads that the university ran to recruit students from surrounding areas. Oh yeah, early newspaper ads. Okay, the early newspaper ads are not early meaning when Jefferson was there. They're early meaning like the 1840s. So I'm going to assume here, I haven't read this yet, but that Barton gives no dates. So, let's see. Well, so let's take this one here where he's actually got a footnote, okay, that says, religious services are regularly performed at the university by a chaplain who is appointed in turn from the 4 principal denominations of the state, and by a resolution of the faculty, ministers of the gospel and young men preparing for the ministry may attend any of the schools without the payment of fees to the professors. Okay, we're going to look up Barton's footnote here. I believe this is from the 1840s. Yeah, it's a University of Virginia advertisement from 1843. So this is after Jefferson was gone, after Madison was gone, at the time when there were people trying to bring religion into the university, which we'll get to here. He says that the university only didn't have chaplains in its first 3 years. Because the university was establishing its reputation as a trans-denominational university. Actually, the first chaplain was hired by a group of students, and that was when James Madison was the rector. Yeah, because that would have been right after Jefferson died. I got to find this in my book here. In 1829, a chaplain was hired with private contributions. This was the first chaplain. Okay, so where Barton says the university did indeed have chaplains, albeit not for its first 3 years, okay, what we're talking about here is when they did get a chaplain, it was hired with private contributions. But then, okay, that only lasted like that year, because a lack of contributions from 1830 to 1833 made it impossible for them to have enough money for these private contributors to come up with enough money to hire a chaplain. At this time, chaplains were not permitted to live on the university campus. That was one of Jefferson, Madison, the chaplain. Even when the chaplain was hired with these private contributions and they had a chaplain, that chaplain was not allowed to live on the campus. So that meant that the people, the students, faculty, whoever was kicking in to hire themselves a chaplain also had to be able to support that chaplain's living expenses off campus. And then during the 1832-1833 school year, it was a student. And again, Madison's thing that was right in line with current law of what's allowed in public schools. A student named McClurg Wickham took charge and organized a group of about 30 students, all of whom signed a pledge that between them they would contribute enough money to pay the salary of a chaplain. Wickham's plan was approved by the chairman of the faculty and presented to the Board of Visitors, who approved it at their July 1833 meeting. And he quotes Madison here, saying that permanent provision for religious instruction and observance among the students would be made by, and there's an ellipsis, services of clergymen. Okay, you got Barton, you got an ellipsis, quoting Madison. I got to look this up. Bear with me because this is in Madison's handwriting and it's kind of faint. So Madison saying, I have indulged more particularly the hope that, and this is where Barton starts his quote, that provision, and the word permanent's not in the Madison's letter, that provision for religious instruction and observances among the students. Oh wait, I have this quote in my book. I don't have to decipher it again. Well, ain't this special? What Barton is quoting here, where he says that Madison announced that permanent, and permanent is Barton's word inserted in brackets, that permanent provision for religious instruction and observance among the students would be made by, and then there's an ellipsis, services of clergymen. That's from the letter I already quoted, where Madison was saying that he wanted the clergymen, the chaplains, to be hired by the students or their parents. Okay, so here's what Barton lops out of that quote there to make it say what he wants it to say. Okay, I'm going to get to that part of the quote. That provision, and Barton sticks the word permanent in there before provision in brackets, I guess to make it look like this was something that did happen and went on. That provision for religious instruction, this is from the real quote, that religious instruction and observance among the students would be made by, okay, that's where Barton stops and has his ellipsis. This is what the real quote continues with. Made by themselves or their parents and guardians, each contributing to a fund to be applied in remunerating the services of a clergyman. And Barton only puts services of a clergyman. He cuts out that whole part that it would be the students themselves or their parents and guardians would be contributing to have this chaplain. So in Barton's version, it looks like Madison made an announcement. It was just in a letter to Chapman Johnson. Madison announced that they were going to have chaplains, and obviously that is edited to make it look like Madison was going to have the university hire permanent chaplains. That is not what the real quote says. Where the hell is my stress rocket? Okay, and then Barton's conclusion from his misquote of what Madison's letter said is, the university, therefore, extended official recognition to one primary chaplain for all the students, with the chaplain position rotating annually among the major denominations that Jefferson identified as the Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterians, and Anglicans. And of course, Jefferson's dead at this point, so he's not identifying anything. In 1829, Presbyterian clergyman Reverend Edward Smith became the first chaplain at the University of Virginia. It was an official university position, but unpaid. No. it was a chaplain hired by the students, and it only lasted a year. And then he jumps right to 1833, and as I said before, from 1830 to 1833, there was no chaplains because the students couldn't cough up enough money. So Barton, the way he words it here, it makes it look like that first chaplain was there from 1829 to 1833. By just beginning the next sentence, in 1833, after 3/4 of the students pledged their own money for the chaplain's support, and again, I mean, I don't know if it was 3/4 or not, I'm not even going to bother checking that, but that was that McClurg Wickham getting, student-led, getting students to pledge the money, okay? And he goes into what chaplain was hired at that time, and that he became the first paid chaplain, again implying that he was being paid by the university. Nowhere in any of this does Barton say that the rule was that the students raised the money to hire their chaplain, okay? Nowhere. This is all, in Barton's book, an official university position chaplain. Okay, and then he jumps to 1855. The university built a parsonage to provide a residence for the university chaplain, because as I said before, under Madison and Jefferson and up until 1855, the chaplain was not allowed to live on the campus. I believe there was a battle over that in the 1840s, but I'm not even going to get into that because I think you get the idea here. And then he lists a bunch of chaplains who were chaplains there. But again, this is 3 decades now we're talking after Jefferson. Okay, so another one of Barton's conclusions. In short, first-hand source documents, especially Jefferson's own writings, incontestably refute all 4 modern assertions about the alleged secular nature of the University of Virginia. If anyone examines the original sources and claims otherwise, they are, to use the words of early military chaplain William Baderwolf, just as likely to, quote, look all over the sky at high noon on a cloudless day and not see the sun. I just want to end with what is probably the most indisputable proof that Jefferson did, in fact, found a secular university. And that would be that in the 1840s, the Presbyterian clergy decided that they now had the opportunity, with Madison and Jefferson gone, to introduce religious education into the university. Now, if there had been religious education in the university before